I'd like to welcome you. My name is Mariette DiCristina. I'm the Dean of the College of Communication. You're joining us for a discussion on media manipulation in an age of quarantine. This session is being recorded, so please mute your mics. Thanks for that. Today's discussion is one of a series of virtual events for the spring. We're discussing how researchers and professionals in communication are grappling with the circumstances of now and into the future. We're so super lucky today to be joined by Dr. Joan Donovan. Welcome, Joan.
Thanks for having me.
I'm just going to read Joan's bio a little, then explain what we'll be doing today, and then we'll dive right in. Dr. Donovan is director of the Technology and Social Change Research Project at the Shorenstein Center at Harvard. She leads the field in examining internet and technology studies, online extremism, media manipulation, and disinformation campaigns. Her research and teaching interests are focused on media manipulation, effects of disinformation campaigns, and adversarial media movements. Prior to joining Harvard Kennedy School, Dr. Donovan was the research lead for Data and Society's Media Manipulation Initiative, where she led a large team of researchers studying efforts to manipulate social technical systems for political gain. She continues to hold an affiliate appointment with Data and Society. Dr. Donovan received her PhD in Sociology and Science Studies from the University of California, San Diego, and was a postdoctoral fellow at the UCLA Institute for Society and Genetics, where she studied white supremacists' use of DNA, ancestry tests, social movements, and technology. Just a couple of housekeeping points. Joan's going to speak to us for a little while about what we've been seeing with media manipulation during the COVID-19 pandemic. And after that, I'm going to ask her a few questions about it, and then we'll take your questions as well. Please put them in the chat and I'll moderate. Thank you very much for joining us, and Dr. Donovan, over to you, please.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I really wish we could have done this in person. It's way more fun to do this kind of work and talk to people about it. I can tell you that studying this has been a mind trip since the beginning, but it is even weirder when everybody you know is now looking for the Easter eggs of misinformation and finding plenty. So I am going to do a screen share here, so don't be alarmed. What's going to happen is your screen is going to get bigger, and then you can hit escape and adjust it to the size that you need. And then I'm going to go through a few slides, and I'm also going to add in a few other things that I think you should know in this moment that'll help you understand why you should be looking for timely, relevant, and local information. And so I'm going to do that now. So you guys will now see a screen share, and I will go into presentation mode. And then I can also still see the chat. I can make it come up here. So if you do have some kind of burning question and I see it, I will try to answer. So I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about information and then get into the nitty-gritty of media manipulation. And then I'm going to also post the link to these slides in the chat so that you have them, so that you can cherish them forever and maybe even print them out. I don't know, and like read them before you go to bed. So, and so here we go. So there will be some information that you'll get about the Technology and Social Change Project as well as part of this slide deck. So the ways in which we're starting to think about these problems is we're thinking about misinformation, which is spreading false information, rumors, insults, pranks, hoaxes, scams, these kinds of things. We make the distinction between misinformation and disinformation, though, to look at the creation and distribution of intentionally false information, usually for political ends. And so that's why we make this distinction. So misinformation is false information, but perhaps with an ambiguous intent. Maybe it's someone sharing something as just in case, maybe it's a rumor, but if they think it might help you, they might share it with you. But disinformation is different in the sense that it is really about intentional false misinformation and usually has some kind of political outcome. The new thing that we're trying to think through with public health professionals is this notion of the infodemic. So the World Health Organization's defined an infodemic as an overabundance of information, some accurate, some not, that makes it hard for people to find trustworthy sources and reliable guidance when they need it. And this has been really difficult during the pandemic because the words COVID-19 and coronavirus are both targeted by hoaxers and scammers and phishing operations, malware operations. It's also the place where we see so many predatory lending start to show up. And in the midst of it all, you might be just searching for information that's like, what are the symptoms of COVID-19 and can I get a test? And so finding that specific kind of information in this moment requires a different strategy. So all the while, media manipulation is going to continue to happen, but the way that we're going to have to get around it as news consumers and as people who are information seekers online is going to require a different strategy. And so when we're thinking about manipulation and looking at a manipulation campaign, we're really looking for 5 points of action. We're looking at where is this manipulation campaign being planned, who and what is spreading it across the web and social platforms, right? How does a rumor or a hoax or a scam move from Facebook to Twitter to a website to a blog all the way up the chain to CNN, for instance? We're very specific about looking for responses to misinformation and disinformation. So we look at how are industries responding, how are activists responding, politicians and journalists, because you can imagine there's hundreds, if not thousands, of attempts to, get people to pay attention to your issue or your cause, or to get them to share your blog post. But it's really only when let me see if I can make this larger. Does that work for people if the screen is larger? You should be able to zoom in with your Zoom, but does that work better? Okay, I will leave it open like this.
Yeah.
So in the life cycle, once we get an understanding that people are responding to a media manipulation attempt, then we want to look at, well, what are the changes to the information ecosystem? What are the actual responses? Are platforms removing the accounts? Are they demoting the content? Have they banned the user? Have they involved the FBI, for instance? We want to look at the overall changes to the information ecosystem, and then we want to look at the adjustments by media manipulators to the new information environment. Because usually when we do these kind of case studies, what we end up finding time and time again is it's the same person over and over, or the same groups of people over and over that are using the same tactics. So a word on how to find local, relevant, and timely information before I get to a few case studies that we've been working on. Be attentive to local news for instructions and information about closures, and corroborate information with other sources, and sign up for telephone alerts from your city or town. These are ways in which you can ensure that you are getting at least an approximate version of the most up-to-date information in your local area. As well, begin from your local government websites and social media. Be very mindful not to believe the comments. So there are people that are there doing what we call brigading, that are showing up in the comment streams of different government social media. For instance, Michigan is a huge target on itself right now for trolls. So read the missives from local governments, but do not take the comments into consideration at this stage. And if officials or city officials or town officials are responding to rumors, avoid spreading the debunk unless it's clear and necessary. So for instance, we saw a bunch of rumors around martial law, and Marco Rubio steps in and says, hey guys, there's no martial law coming. And as a result of that, it really triggered a whole set of amplification around martial law in a way that it probably wouldn't have played out if not for that response by a politician. And so when you're thinking about your information network and your people that you're serving, if somebody has posted a rumor, the way that you respond to it does matter. And so be mindful of that. Do not spread rumors, of course. Sharing unconfirmed rumors contributes to fear, panic, and isolation. It is very, very scary for a lot of people right now. Friends of mine that live alone, they call themselves solos right now, and they are definitely feeling the brunt of this. And so when you share unconfirmed rumors, be mindful that other people are going to see it, and if it promotes panic and you don't need to do such a thing, please don't. And avoid sharing images of empty shelves, hazmat suits, or people in distress, because that does also contribute to isolation. And especially as we're thinking about what's happening at the hospitals right now, just be mindful that people will behave accordingly. And if it looks like the hospital is completely overwhelmed and someone has symptoms, they might actually see a picture and make the wrong decision about when and how to seek treatment. So make sure that the images that you're sharing are from confirmed sources and that you have firsthand information that you're distributing. Follow and share recommendations of CDC and the World Health Organization, and post these recommendations in places where friends and family can see them. It's very important for us to explain new terms, especially for us who have family members that don't speak English. A term like social distancing is new and confusing. And so be mindful of that and explain even words like pandemic can be confusing for people. And so do as much as you can to share information widely and clearly. And then the last set of advice I have on finding local, relevant, and timely information right now is to focus on the facts. Misinformation is meant to trick you. So be compassionate if you need to correct someone. If someone is sharing rumors, maybe reach out to them in a private message and not in the replies, and say, hey, this has been debunked. Here's an article that says that this isn't true. Just thought you should know, something like that. But it's going to fool. The misinformation that we're seeing is fooling people. That's just the truth of the matter. And so we have to be mindful of the feelings that other people are going to have when they are getting corrected. And then seek out mutual aid networks in Massachusetts and beyond. There are a lot of different community organizers that are using social media, Nextdoor, Google Docs, and Instagram to help deliver food and medical supplies. And so think about how to engage with these mutual aid groups and avoid sending money or donations to unknown entities. There are so many scams right now asking for cash donations. If it's an organization that's been, a great contributor to your neighborhood or your area, by all means donate to them. But anything that's sprung up out of the blue right now could be a scam, and it could be a credit card scam. And so you might lose more than just the donation. And so any scams that come up saying, get this kind of health insurance or get this life insurance right now, we're just seeing a record number of that across the board. All right, so let's get to the misinformation now. We are running a very large-scale research project at Shorenstein on the media, we're calling it the Media Manipulation Casebook. We're gonna do 100 case studies of misinformation, and we are rolling through right now, getting our page up and running, and we are gonna have a coming soon page very, very soon that will have some of these case studies for you to read. So one thing that we've been very interested in understanding more about is misinformation about COVID-19. So here I have a couple of examples, and I will send you these slides about martial law rumors. The tactic that this is using is what we call a chain reaction. So in one of the text messages, it's trying to evoke a feeling of giving you the feeling that you are an insider by saying, please be advised within 48 to 72 hours, the president will evoke what's called the Stafford Act. So if you Googled the Stafford Act, you would find out that that was true. But then this part is what's meant to get you to buy into it. Just got off the phone with some of my military friends up in DC who just got out of a 2-hour briefing. And then it says the president will order a 2-week mandatory quarantine for the nation, stock up on whatever you guys need to make sure you have a 2-week supply of everything. Please forward to your network. Now, researchers of misinformation have seen a version of this text message in at least 15 different countries. And so what that means to me is that there's probably some kind of coordinated campaign to get these messages as a screenshot into people's local areas. And it just ups the panic, it ups the anxiety, and it can cause a run on grocery stores, which could be dangerous. The next thing is the Marco Rubio tweet that says, please stop spreading rumors about martial law, spelled like the name Marshall. Completely false. We'll continue to see closings and restrictions on hours of non-essential businesses in certain cities and states, but that is not martial law. And what this does in terms of causing a chain reaction is it did get media to start covering martial law almost needlessly. So in the mix of trying to get information about what stay at home means, people are bumping into misinformation about martial law, which can really ratchet up the panic and anxiety. But this has been widely debunked as misinformation. Another thing that we've been trying to understand is immunity or propensity to get coronavirus. So in misinformation about COVID-19, especially in early March, we were seeing an NBA player, for instance, was tweeting, not making light of it at all, serious question, has a Black person ever got coronavirus? The second one says Black people cannot get coronavirus, repeated a bunch of times in response to Elon Musk's tweet that said the coronavirus panic is dumb. We are working on a case study about this and how misinformation about susceptibility can be really a barrier for people to think about, well, when is the time I need to get treatment? Because the symptoms of COVID-19 can feel like either a flu or feel fluish or feel like a cold. Sometimes it's hard for people to understand what's happening to them. And so this kind of dangerous speculation about some kind of natural immunity is a problem. We saw this more recently with examples that California has somehow acquired a herd immunity to misinformation. And I think that that's also very dangerous because they were saying, oh, it was a Stanford researcher who said that California must have herd immunity. And when you dug down below the surface of that affiliation, what you found was actually the Stanford researcher was a historian at the Hoover Institute and was an affiliate, not at all a researcher per se at the university that is studying disease. And then the last example I'll show you is about disinformation about COVID-19. And this is something that we featured in our Meme War weekly newsletter. We do put out a newsletter every week about meme wars, and this one we did about this, it was about 2 weeks ago on Twitter and Facebook and other places. There was the hashtag Where's Joe? So Joe Biden had sort of disappeared, quote unquote, from the media. There was a lot of hype about coronavirus, and in the midst of it, people had started to tweet that Joe Biden was either dead or had coronavirus. We saw this happening where there was two different kinds of hoaxes happening. One was a fake tweet that was photoshopped together to say that it was from Jill Biden saying, I'm sorry for the hilariousness of this, but it's kind of funny. It says, Joe Biden has coronavirus, and even though diarrhea isn't usually a symptom, he's covered in it. I can't wait to tell if it came out of his butt or if he was eating it, but it's everywhere. He died and now I have to clean it up myself. Disgusting, right? But think about if you just saw the initial first, few lines and it says Joe Biden with the blue check mark. And of course you see how many shares and likes this has. Even though it's borderline parody, it was contributing to all this disinformation. And then the other image here is of a faked test result. So someone had taken a a screenshot of a real test result and then had replaced the information with Joe Biden. That test result wasn't just circulating on social media as a forgery. Someone was emailing it to someone had emailed it to every single BuzzFeed reporter, which is, of course, a kind of media manipulation tactic we see where people are trying to get reporters to take a scoop. And that, of course, is really problematic. The other thing that I want you to think about as you're, surfing the information superhighway, as they call it, is that you need to maintain your credibility. And so it's not up to all of us to, stay up all night really trying to correct everyone. But now is a different kind of time for misinformation and disinformation. And so we do have to really maintain our credibility by being good stewards of information in this moment. And I'll tell you why that's important is because we are seeing an increase in the number of cyber attacks right now, especially ones that are hacking attempts. And of course, there's very unsubstantiated rumors right now. I got to check the news about potentially the Gates Foundation being hacked last night. We're seeing a lot of stuff. I haven't figured out if it's real or not, but there are a lot of hacking attempts. There's also the WHO is reporting cyber attacks exploiting COVID-19. They're impersonating the CDC. So if you get a screenshot and it has the CDC logo, it might not actually be from them. So try to go back and find that information. And then, of course, we've seen quite a bit of Zoom bombing that's been happening to educators and journalists. So please be mindful to protect your accounts with secure password management. Be alert for hacking, phishing, and impersonation, more so now than ever. Practice safe browsing. So make sure that in the corner of your browser, you see what you see on my screen, which is that little lock next to where it says Google Docs. You want to make sure that that lock is locked every time you are putting your information into a browser. And then check in on the cyber health of your friends and family. I know from my experience, my mother was very interested in picking up some health insurance, given the fact that she felt like she might get too many bills from COVID-19. That kind of fear is really important to acknowledge and then explain why it's a problem. Someone just asked a question about where's the lock. It's up here next to where it says docs.google in the address bar. And if that lock is open, it means that the site is unsecure. And so just letting you know, next week we have a speaker series. So this, well, actually it's this week. Change that right now. Let's do this. Ta-da. We're going to be talking with Ashish Jha and Seti Warren about Two Truths and a Lie, Misinformation and Public Health. And that's going to be Friday from 1 to 2 p.m. And I'll get you the sign up link in the chat. So that's that. Thank you so much. And I'm here for questions.
Thanks a million, Joan. That was really great overview. Really appreciate it. As usual, it kind of blows my mind. I can't wait for that website to come up. I know there'll be questions popping in the chat, and indeed I see one already. And why don't we follow on, because you just had given that thought of how do reporters, because many of the folks who are listening, they're professional communicators or faculty who are teaching, and also professionals or students who are about to enter the market, and they're looking for advice on, how do you sift through all the bad information to get the right info. And it's great to do trust signaling, or I'm sure that's not the right term, of maintaining your credibility and being somebody people can count on. But how on the other end do we grapple with the infodemic as it's flowing in?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're living in like an anomaly, right? The things that we would imagine would work don't work. I have been engaging with the past week public health risk communications professionals to understand the differences between how public health tries to communicate trust and how journalists try to communicate trust. And within the public health field, trust is really about listening to experts and in giving experts the authority to make recommendations. But as we learned we did a Me More weekly about Dr. Fauci, and Fauci goes viral, quote unquote. And if people trust the scientist, they don't trust the science. And so this week we saw a whole bunch of reopen protests where people were out in public, not social distancing, not wearing masks, and were chanting "Fire Fauci," right? So the kind of trust that needs to be engendered around an infodemic and health misinformation seems to me to be a little bit different from the kind of trust we traditionally talk about related to trust in journalism, which is to say that we want our news organization to be respected. We want our journalism to be fact-checked and timely, which sometimes are in tension with one another. Being fast is, a barrier to being right in some cases. And as an academic, I have the luxury of time that journalists, of course, don't have. But I think that in this moment, when we're thinking about journalism and trust, that we actually have to build a very strong bridge between our public health professionals and journalists who are committed to understanding the science and then communicating as best they can what we're uncertain about. Because people want science to be true always. And the fact is, we've had several different iterations of mask, for instance, mask controversies around who should wear a mask, when someone should wear a mask. And this has contributed to some public distrust in expert advice in the CDC, as well as the WHO. But by and large, if you look at the science around it, number one, we didn't know the disease pathology as clearly as we do now. So we didn't know if it was airborne. Number two, think about your own experience wearing masks. How many more times do you touch your face, given the fact that the mask is falling off, it's moving around, it's not staying in place, your eyeglasses are getting fogged up, any of these reasons. So experts in the field were saying, well, there's a chance that wearing masks could even increase a person's susceptibility to COVID-19 if it is, in fact, mostly transferred from surface to face. And so the mask recommendations can be explained, but it's not necessarily, what it isn't is a conspiracy, right? It's not this, the government wanted to hold on to masks and didn't want anybody else to have them, because people were buying them anyway. People were buying toilet paper anyway. And so the trust, though, is going to have to be built, and it's going to have to be between journalists and public health professionals at this stage.
I see a follow-on question on the same theme of how do we support our journalists. This is from Professor Michelle Amazine. It says, great presentation, Joan. Can you speak to the challenges journalists and news media face and how to respond and cover Trump's daily marathon press briefings and the state protests that seem to be springing up that may be coordinated?
Yeah, we are right now looking at those, the back end of those coordination of those protests, and it seems to be that there's reporting on it from NBC and a few other outlets that show very clearly that the reopen protests are built on the networks of gun rights activists. So there's already a very active contingency of gun rights activists across at least a couple hundred Facebook pages at this stage, if not more. It's really hard to tell. Those activists are the ones that are organizing these reopen events. And we started to get attuned to the guns rights activists back in January when there was that big protest in Virginia. And one of the things that was confounding is that people were like, how do they mobilize 10,000 people to show up in Virginia for this event? And we started looking at the hashtag come and take it. We started looking at Facebook groups that were sharing the event. And it was really more like old school Facebook organizing from like what we would have seen during Occupy. People had just set up an event page that was time, place, and purpose, and that was that. And people shared that singular event, and they knew where to go, they knew what the purpose was, and they were motivated to act because they felt that there was a real threat to their gun rights in Virginia. That kind of solidarity and networking that was built in that time seems to be the similar networks are now the ones that are starting to organize these Reopen America protests. And journalists, yeah, it's going to be a huge, huge challenge to cover those protests. I was just on the phone this morning with WBUR about understanding what happened in New Hampshire, and every Friday night there's a protest, a Reopen protest in New Hampshire. But I will say one thing very specific about this that journalists should understand is that the trade-off is not between someone's civil liberties and their health here. Facebook provides a service that is amplifying information into people's networks. And so even if you want the information about the event and you sign up for the information about the event, that is a networking service that Facebook provides. You could still do the same kind of organizing with a website, but you don't have captive networks. And so you still have your civil liberties and your free speech. It's just that you don't have it enhanced by the use of Facebook's amplification technologies. The second thing that Facebook is grappling with is that underneath it, there's a political reason for wanting to reopen America. Everybody wants to go back to work. The economy is failing. There's massive job loss. All of that pain is very real, and that people should be able to protest. However, what is underneath it and what is in the descriptions of these events is medical misinformation or health misinformation about social distancing is not advisable. There's conspiracy theories about 5G. There's ideas about certain people not being susceptible, or that it's already been here and we don't need to be mindful of it. You probably already had it. So that what's baked into the description around these protests is dangerous health misinformation, and we can't ignore that fact as we want to support people to protest. That being said, in-person protest isn't the only way to do this. There's been some really ingenious ways that people have started to hold protests that are these Operation Gridlock protests, where people do drive their cars around their state house. There's also been really beautiful memorials. I mean, people are dying, right? And so we've seen people do memorials in their cars. And so there are safe ways to show one's solidarity or to participate in protests, but showing up, ignoring social distancing, not using a mask, that is what the issue is, not necessarily do people have the right, quote unquote, to say this on Facebook or not.
There's I'd like to jump to some other roles, but first I'd like to give this follow up. There's a question that just jumped into the chat about collaborating with sociologists on what kind of role does group identity play. So social identity theory, folks who are, believe because a member of their group believes, and that conforming role that plays, and others who you mistrust just based on the group membership that they have.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to understand in this moment about anomalies and about where people land their trust related to in-group beliefs and influence that others have. And I didn't even get to the role of the press conferences in all of this. But yeah, you know, it's normal for humans to contest any challenge to our way of life. And in this moment, you know, we're experiencing a new abnormal. It's not like we can call up, you know, older folks that we know and say, remember that time you went through a pandemic? What was that like, right? Like, there's not people we can look to for support about where and how this is going to end and what that looks like. And so we really are depending upon our governors, especially, to give us timely, relevant local information. And then the other piece of this is that many of us have never been this online. We are plugged in, you know, of course, we've all had our phones and we've been plugged into our phones 24 hours a day, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're doing your work life, your home life, your everything life in the same space. And one of the ways in which we work out our opinions and our ideas is through what we would call the third space. So you have your kind of work self, you have your home self, and then you have your social self in that third space, where you might say to your friends, I saw this crazy thing the other day. Did you see that? That person's crazy. And then they say, oh, I don't think they're crazy. Actually, it looks like this. And I was reading this other thing. And so we kind of work out what we believe in conversation with one another. And that's really hard to do right now, especially when we're getting so much conflicting and problematic information in the midst of just trying to figure out, you know, day to day how we're going to manage. And so I do think it's important that we start to think differently about how academia can contribute to this. And one thing I'll say about the Trump pressers, because I do watch them, much to the chagrin of my spouse who doesn't watch them, and they, you know, the politicization of coronavirus is going to go on for probably another decade. You know, the missteps, the miscues, the missed opportunities, the who to blame for what call is going to go on for a very, very long time. And so we have to be careful not to rely too much on information in the moment to guide our future casting. But at the same time, what's happening in these briefings and how they've shifted to prime time, this has really dislocated a lot of people from being able to watch their local news because they're so tuned into the president. And depending upon what channel you're watching, either if you're watching CNN, they will debunk things in real time. Whereas if you're watching on Fox News, for instance, it is just like all the president all the time. But I did think one thing was really telling of what is going on in those press conferences, which is I think that when a reporter asked Fauci for more information about hydroxychloroquine and Trump interrupted and shut it down, I do think that we are witnessing a serious fissure between the medical advisors and the politicians, particularly the way in which Trump wants to reopen quickly and sort of in a grand way, rather than what really is going to need to happen, which is stuttered stages once we get comprehensive testing. And so I do really worry that the pressers are going to really pose a challenge for trusting either leadership or political leadership or science. And those things, once they're pitted against one another, you're either acting on faith in your politics or you're acting on the best medical advice we have in the moment, which can sometimes be contradicted in the future.
Yeah, I mean, a real challenge there. I know in some cases, so I'm thinking about the bad messages or bad actor messaging. And in some cases, media outlets have simply shut off their comments, for instance, to prevent bad actors from creating a challenge. But it's another thing altogether, I think, to try to shut off every press conference that the president chooses to hold. And I don't know, it will be interesting to see how we end up grappling with that. So let's talk a little bit, because with an eye to time, I just want to make sure we touch some other related topics. We've talked about the interaction of journalists in this era, and also some of the things that academia can bring to bear in shoring things up or presenting the facts and collaborating. How about you just had an essay in Nature. How about the tech companies? And can we talk a little bit more about their role, what's been going on, what maybe should go on in the future, and Australia? That announcement was really interesting to me recently as well.
Oh, which announcement from Australia?
The idea of making Facebook and Google pay news outlets so that they would help.
Oh, yeah.
The ad dollars.
Yeah, that is going to be a lot. The responsibility of technology companies in this moment. So we now have spent at least a decade with social media, and we realized that the grand experiment is not what we thought it was going to be. So early adopters of social media, activists, everyday folk, when it was called social networking, right? You bring all your friends and family into one space, and they can look at what you're writing about, and they can look at what you're reading, and you can share with them photos of your cat. And all seemed really great at the time. But as the internet has become more and more fueled by advertising dollars, and more fueled by influencers and politicians and celebrity culture, we've really lost that essence, or that feeling that the social media is for the people, by the people, about the people. And once you kick open the gates and create technologies that circumvent our truth institutions, we've now seen what the impact of that is, which is authoritarian governments are on the rise. Politicians can openly lie to the populace and spread that message, and it's very, very difficult to correct the record. And as Facebook has become essential communication infrastructure in some other countries, where if you even want a doctor's appointment, you got to message them on Facebook. That's how you get in touch. In the United States, there's a lot of people who have reduced a lot of their telephone and other communication mechanisms down to having everybody in Facebook. And so Facebook becomes a much more important place for speech than we perhaps had imagined. But in this moment, I think they need to do a better job. They must do a better job at curating information, because if they don't, we see the ill effects, which is that people who are motivated to share health misinformation have a strategy for that. They have a strategy for reaching new audiences. They have a strategy for being heard. And it really plays into the way the algorithms are actually built. So the algorithms are built in a way to surface fresh and relevant content. And so nobody is going on the internet every day and typing in, the earth is round. I've seen the curvature of the earth. It appears to be round. Here are some pictures from this satellite. Earth's still round. There are, on the other hand, and I kid you not, people who go on the internet every day and say, you know what, the earth is flat. And here's a picture of the ocean. You can see no curvature. I've taken this picture. It's proof positive. The earth is flat. The earth is flat. The earth is flat. Here's 10 reasons why the earth is flat. So how do you compete with that? How do you compete with people who are vested in making sure that everybody knows that the earth is flat, and understand that. And like when we look at anti-Semitism online, there are people every day who go online and say the Holocaust never happened. And Zuckerberg went on the record with Kara Swisher maybe a year and a half ago to say, well, we don't delete Holocaust misinformation because someone might just be wrong. That, and you know, they have the right to be wrong. And Deirdre Mulligan has written a beautiful paper on called Rescripting Search, looking at what should happen if you type in, did the Holocaust happen? And you have a right to truth, and you should be able to know. But there aren't people going online every day saying, yep, reread history books, Holocaust definitely happens, right? And so the algorithm actually plays into misinformation, conspiracy, hoaxes, in ways that we didn't anticipate, and we must change. And I think it's the role of independent researchers to actually do that change. On the cost sharing around advertising and platforms, this has been something that news organizations have pushed for quite a long time, for some kind of tax on the platforms that could be distributed to, you know, reallocate resources to local news. Because of the way that the internet works, Facebook puts its advertising all around your content. Google puts its advertising all around your content. Twitter puts its advertising all around your content. And as a result, by the time someone gets to your webpage to visit your content, you know, it's been utterly devalued. And so we do see quite a bit of the advertising revenue goes to search and social companies. I don't know how that would affect public trust in news media if there was a case where, you know, Facebook was paying into the New York Times or the Guardian. I think we'd have to be really structured about what that looks like and what fairness looks like. And then also we have to make sure that we can maintain objectivity throughout all of this, because tech journalists need to be able to criticize these companies. And we don't want to create a situation where we're also beholden to them for revenue.
That's an interesting point. Are there just following up on those tech platforms and their, you know, and their role in making sure that misinformation isn't, or in the future, maybe making sure that misinformation isn't given such a life of its own. Are there any good examples shown of partnership models that have worked in the past that we could look to between these big tech companies and, say, academic institutions or others?
Speaking as someone who doesn't take tech money or data from tech companies, I am wary about the restrictions that companies place on those they partner with. And I say this as someone who has had no direct experience with this, but at least with colleagues of mine who have worked within Google or have worked with different research teams at platform companies, is that platform companies do have a right of review, and they sometimes will kill the report if it is too critical or potentially, you know, really in the report that I'm thinking about is, you know, it pitted some foreign governments against one another by being able to say, we have evidence now of this country doing foreign influence operations and this country doing foreign influence operations. And the platform that this was done in conjunction with just said, we can't publish this. This is not it. And so, you know, as academics, we're really stuck because we do need to maintain our objectivity. And part of that isn't just about a veneer of objectivity, but it is also about the nitty gritty of that, what that means when we are underfunded, understressed, and need to investigate or research these platforms. There have been, though, a couple of partnerships within journalism that some people have felt have been really fruitful. And this has to do with some of the work done by Google News Lab, especially to raise up and provide technology for news startups in various countries and whatnot. So I certainly don't speak for everyone, and I speak from my point of view, which is that I think it's a little more tricky with academia. And then I think that if this money were to come to news organizations, we would really want to see it be housed in a place that releases the news organization from any ties or consultation with the tech company. We'd have to have some kind of foundation or some kind of buffer in the middle.
Yeah, thank you. So I with an eye to time, we just have a couple of minutes left. I wondered if you might like to say anything about the Misinformation Review, which is brand new.
Yes, the Misinformation Review. I should try to find a link for it. But it's something that we've been doing at Shorenstein, and it's been a really labor of love to get it off the ground. But it is our own journal on misinformation. And we have a special call out right now for stuff about COVID-19, and we've started to publish the, some really cutting edge research. And the idea of it, academics, it's gonna, you know, kind of blow the lid on your brain right now, but we do 1 month turnaround. So you submit it, there's a very fast desk reject process. And then we actually pay our reviewers, who are graduate students and professors, to do a 2-week turnaround. Then you get a week for review, and then we get it up. And we do a lot of work around editing to make sure that it's got a consistent voice and a consistent flow. But this has been a field defining thing right now, because you know, this field moves so fast, misinformation moves so fast, and if you really want to have the evidence you need in the moment, you have to be able to have a place for the academic part of this research. And so we're hoping that it can really fill the void in speed that we've been struggling with around misinformation. That all being said, you know, we take misinformation, we take stuff about news and integrity, we take papers in about health, we take in stuff about best practices. We also have a commentary section that people can talk more about how misinformation impacts their work and their fields, and take up some of the thorny debates that, of course, we all get we all get stuck in sometimes. But yeah, I'm very proud of it, and so I hope that people find it a valuable resource. And yes, we do take theoretical papers. Someone had asked.
Okay, I think we're just past time. So I just want to, on behalf of everybody on the call here, Joan, thank you so much for the insights and the, you know, super helpful suggestions, and for blowing our minds. And I look forward to with you again. I hope that we can get this communities together again. And I don't know about others. I feel like, although there have been some discouraging things that we have perhaps felt, I feel that much more energetic about trying to meet these challenges with, you know, both in supporting the students and the faculty here to grapple with the challenges of tomorrow. So thank you so much. I see some applause.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, everyone. And we will, of course, be in touch. And I look forward to coming to campus. I will cross the river for this. So,
Can't wait.
good. All right, let's be in touch.